Hello and welcome to Casual Buddhism. It's been a while since we've been here with Venerable Dhammananda. If you're here for the first time, she is the first fully ordained Theravada nun in Thailand. And I am your host, Cindy Rasicot. I've written a book about her, Finding Venerable Mother, and I have a new book coming out in April on the remarkable life and teachings of Venerable Dhammananda called This Fresh Existence. So I'm happy that will become available. And tonight we have a very special guest, Vanessa Sasson, and she is a professor of religious studies in the liberal arts department of Marianopolis College, where she's been teaching since 1999. She has published widely as a scholar and has a new volume entitled The Buddha, A Storied Life by Oxford University Press. A few years ago, she decided to convert her scholarship into storytelling and produced Yasodhara and the Buddha in 2021, a novel that focuses on Yasodhara's life. And more recently, which I have read and really loved, is The Gathering, which focuses on the women's request for ordination. And I know, Venerable, you were speaking about your how important the book is to you. Could you say some more about that?
And should I repeat what I already said?
If you don't mind a little bit, yeah.
You know, I look at Vanessa and I thought she's a young scholar. You know, I really underestimate her. For a young person, still young, no, Vanessa? For a young person, for a young professor, to be interested in the life story of these old Bhikkhunis of 2,600 years something. Number one, I'm very grateful because you are really helping us to continue this lineage. Number two, the fact that she gathered all these informations, detailed informations about these Bhikkhunis and really weave them into a story, something that is accessible to everyone to read. That is remarkable. I really think it's remarkable. And when I was reading her book, I couldn't put it down. You know, I had to go through the whole thing, wanting to know what's happening to this person and that person, you know. And very wisely, she allowed this Bhikkhuni who tells the story coming from a very strange background or something like a prostitute, you know. And that I think is very important, to allow this person to be telling the story of the whole stories of all the Bhikkhunis coming from different walks of life. So that is a technique that Vanessa used in her book that I really appreciate and I really recommend for you interested in the history of Buddhism, in the history of the Bhikkhunis, to please read.
Oh, thank you.
As a writer, Vanessa, how did you decide to choose the main character, the narrator of the book? Can you tell us about your process in writing?
Yeah. So what Venerable said is right, that one of the nuns that I chose to use as my main character is a nun called Vimala, and she's in the Therigatha. So the inspiration for the book is the Therigatha. It's a beautiful collection, and if any of your viewers have not read this book, I really recommend it. It's a early collection of Pali literature. It's so beautiful, and we think it's about 2,000 years old, and we think it's really written by women. Like, we have no reason to believe it wasn't. And it's 73 poems that tell the stories of different nuns and their lives. And it's all in one little book. And so you go from poem to poem, meeting different nuns from maybe the Buddhist time. And in that book, you get an introduction to all of these first women who may have been the women who asked for ordination from the Buddha. And they come from so many backgrounds. And they come with different stories. They come with different motivations. Like, I think sometimes we think, oh, if you're going to become a nun, it has to be with this pure motivation, or this, you're ready to become enlightened. But if you look at monastic communities, people go to monastic life for all kinds of reasons. And in the process, they become transformed. But they arrive with their own baggage, with their own history. And if you look at the Therigatha, so many of these women have different stories. So some of them are queens and princesses, like Queen Mahabhajapati and Princess Sundarinanda. But then you have like beggars on the side of the road who just, they're hungry. And they see the women passing and they say, well, if I join the monastery, can I eat? Right? And then some women are prostitutes and they're running away. And some women are courtesans. Some of them are very educated and some of them are not. And so there's all this diversity among these first Buddhist women. And I think that's probably always been true, is that there's always been so many different kinds of women who join the Sangha. And you see it in the text. And so I thought, well, I have to find a woman who's complicated and has to do her journey, right? If you have a character who's already almost awakened, it's difficult to tell that story. You want a woman you can relate to who has her struggles, because who are we if we don't have struggles? And so I chose a woman that had her struggles and still wanted to go forward. And I thought that that was really courageous. And I think so much of the Therigatha reflects that this diversity of women who are courageous and have stories. They're not perfect, right? And I think there's so much courage in early Buddhist literature to show you this complexity. They don't give you a clean, perfect, everybody's ideal and everybody's awakened. No one's awakened. That's why they go see the Buddha, right? They're going to try to figure something out.
Yes.
So I chose a character who I could relate to, who I thought was, but also who wasn't too big of a character. So for example, one of the characters that's in the Therigatha that I'm sure you both know, for sure Venerable knows, is Patachara. And she's somebody I loved. I've always loved her story. I've always loved her as she's so courageous, right? Her story of suffering is so immense. I couldn't tell her story. So I had her in the book, but only on the side, because Patachara's story is so deep. She suffers so much. I thought, I haven't suffered like that. I can't write her story. I'm not permitted because I don't know that kind of suffering. So I had to choose someone whose story I could tell. Otherwise, it wouldn't be honest. And so Vimala was a small character, and that helped me. If she was too big of a character with like too much history and everybody knows and loves her, I would have too much difficulty. So I needed someone minor to work with.
That's really interesting. And
Yeah.
the other question I have, which is so remarkable about what you did in bringing the story to life the way you did, how did you choose to make that transition from research to storytelling?
Well, I think storytelling is so important. I think sometimes as scholars also, sometimes we get so serious about everything that we're doing that I think we forget how important it is to actually connect and care about the research that we're doing, right? The stories is what moves people, right? Venerable must note this because she must tell stories in every sermon, and you always have to tell stories because that's how you go get your audience. That's how you connect to people. I could tell you the philosophy of Buddhism, or I could tell you the story of Patachara. And I guarantee that if I told you Patachara's story, that would affect you so much more than if I gave you the Four Noble Truths. Right? I could tell you the Four Noble Truths, they're very good, but they're formulas. And we don't always connect to philosophy and formula, but stories, they transform who we are. They affect how we see the world. We remember them, right? We carry them around with us. We think about a story because it makes us feel something. And so when I was thinking of this literature, I thought, I need to do what the tradition does. And what does the tradition do? It tells stories. So instead of talking about the tradition, I wanted to try to be in it. So I wanted to tell the story, not just analyze it. And what's been so interesting is I feel people are learning so much from the story more than if I had just given them a philosophy.
Right.
So I find it's a really interesting way to transmit knowledge, to transmit information, is to tell a story. And I think we've underestimated it, right? We're very patronizing about it. We're like, oh, stories are what grandmothers do.
Yeah.
But it's patronizing, and I don't think that's fair. I think stories is how you change people. So I wanted to do something different. I didn't want to stay where I was. And so I decided to tell a story, but I was nervous. It was scary to suddenly tell a story instead of write an academic paper, but
yeah. Yes, as listening to you, Vanessa, I agree completely. I remembered one time I went to this one conference, and we all feminist conference, and we were talking about many things, but only one phrase that remained with me is a story of a CEO, Japanese CEO, who is a big boss, but when he gets home, he cannot find his own shoes. He has to ask. He has to
But you
ask his wife
remembered
for
that.
his shoes. Story like that, a piece of story like that really sticks.
Yes, it
Sticks in
does.
my head.
But I
You
think
know,
it's also how we can use the stories to get to the philosophy of the tradition,
yes,
right? So it's not that you stop with the story, it's that we have to stop underestimating the story, because the
yes,
story can do a lot of work. And so if you want to convey compassion, if you told a story that expresses compassion, it will stay with a person more than if you say Buddhists believe that compassion is important, right? Because you forget. Right. So I thought this story about these women going through the forest and asking the Buddha for ordination, and then the Buddha not even saying yes, right? That's not easy, right? So I had to wrestle with, what do I do with a Buddha who did not say yes and almost looks like he says no? That story tells me more about the complexity of the tradition than almost anything else, is that the tradition tells you the Buddha may have been perfect, but he was very difficult with women. And that's something for me to think about. What do I do with that story? I have to think about that for a long time to figure out where to go with it. And then that the women keep going. He says, I don't know if you should be ordained. And they say, okay, we're coming back and we're going to ask again. And then they ask again. The story of the women asking and just, they're not going to let go. That to me is an impressive story. And that's from 2,500 years ago. Right. So I think we often think that like the first feminists and the first powerful women were in the 1960s when they were burning their bras and saying, the end of patriarchy. But these texts tell us that 2,500 years ago, women were asking for things and fighting for change. So also we tell stories about women being meek or women accepting everything. They didn't accept it 2,500 years ago. And so when women today ask for things, they're in a long tradition of very strong women who asked before them too.
yes.
That's an interesting story to tell. So I think we have stories that we have to think about and let them be messy. When we clean everything up, we're doing ourselves a disservice. So we have to sit with the difficult stories and wonder about them and scratch our heads. And why would the Buddha do what he did? And maybe, does that mean the Buddha is not perfect? What do we do with these stories? We have to ask them and we have to think about them and we have to challenge ourselves, because I think that's how we learn.
Very good.
I'm talking so much, Bhikkhuni, I'm sorry. What do you think, Bhikkhuni?
Yes, I agree. I agree completely. I started when I was not even 3 years old as a storyteller. My mother ran a selling books, how to say, bookshop. And among the books that she was selling, there were some story, fairy tales, in English. So in the evening, when she had time with us, she would pick up one of these fairy tales book, and she would be telling us the story in English. That's the way she started teaching us English, But then in these books, there are also photos to go with it, line drawings, simple line drawings to go with it. And it is that one story that stick in my head. And in the daytime, I would be telling the story to the children, the neighborhood, who would gather around me, and I would be telling them stories, picking up the same book, and these children, some of them were older. I was about 3, some of them were older. They really listened to my stories and they believed that I could read.
So already you were realizing that this is an amazing thing, is to tell a story.
Yes. So this telling story started. I started this telling stories since I was 3 years old, and I realized how important it is. So all the time, even now as a Bhikkhuni, nothing I do but just telling stories. Yeah. And people remembered. People remembered because they could actually picture what you are saying. But if you teach about Four Noble Truths, it's all text, and it's difficult for them to understand unless and until you could pick up one person who is really going through this suffering. Then they can remember, they can memorize, they can picture, they can share the feeling. They can actually have that picture
Yes.
Do
Well, I
you,
think also, oh, sorry, go ahead.
it just occurred to me, do you think that storytelling is part of a feminine lineage of teaching?
I don't think so. I
Mhm.
remembered in Islam, they also have people who go around from village to village telling stories, if I remembered well, and these people, uh, lots of people would be gathered around him just to listen to the story of this
Sure.
learned man, not learned man, but he tells a story.
Mhm.
So I don't think it is within the feminist movement only.
I agree with Venerable on that. And if you look at Buddhist literature, we think most of it was produced by men, and it's stories. There's so many stories in Buddhist literature. It's story after story after story. So you get the philosophy, and then you get a little scene or a moment or a description of something that happens. There's no end to Buddhist storytelling. And I don't think it was all produced by women at all. I think that's what we're when we're patronizing about it and say, oh, stories are for, like, mothers with their children. I think we've really undermined how evocative a story is, because you can remember a story in a way that you can't always remember a philosophy. So if you don't understand the Four Noble Truths, but you understand a story of suffering, you will go back to that story and say, I remember this story now, and now it makes sense to me. Or it changes how we see things. And I'm seeing that with students, when they read a book like this, the tradition becomes alive because it's a story. And they care about the characters, and they care about the women, and they wrestle with the question of the Buddha. Why would the Buddha not say yes? And all of a sudden, the Buddha is an important character to think about. It's not just, oh, I have to learn this for school. All of a sudden it's, this is a difficult, I didn't expect this. What do I do with this story? And all of a sudden you're thinking about it.
Yeah.
And I think that's important. So I felt like it's not just, I wanted to be creative, to answer your question, but I also realized this is a great way to transmit knowledge. I have this privilege of having so much education. I thought this was a great way to share it. It doesn't always have to be in the academic, strict kind of description mode. You can share knowledge in all kinds of ways. And I think this is a real way to share knowledge. I think it's an important way to share knowledge.
My very first academic paper, supposedly academic paper, that I shifted from academic standpoint was a paper presented in United States. It's called, I think, She Who Challenged the Buddha.
Yes, I know that very well. I have that article.
So yes, so I started to step out, and
That's
what
true.
what I have written in that paper, it may not be in the text, but I challenge the academics to find where did they go wrong in this paper. I mean, it could have been like this. It could have been like this in what I'm telling in the story. So I think it's important that academics have to be brave, to make a standpoint apart from traditions.
I think what you just said is very true. It takes courage to break with tradition or what everybody thinks is what you're supposed to do. And the more elite you become, the harder it becomes to break the tradition. But I think what I'm starting to see in the world of academia is that people are starting to say, how else can we share our knowledge? What else can we do with our knowledge? What else, what are we supposed to do with all the things that we know? So I think something special is starting to happen where the doors are opening a little bit, but it does take courage. I think you're right. And I know that article that you wrote, and it's in my computer. So I feel like it's like right behind you. And I thought that was very brave for you to tell the story differently, to use your knowledge in a different way.
Yeah. And also, I think we should also open to art, because art, artists need to study the text and need to get the feel of the story. I'm sorry to say that normally we don't get the artists who read enough sufficiently to get the feel of the story. So the portray, it is visual portray that the artists are giving us. And if they do get into insight a little bit deeper, then we might get, how to say, a better portray from the artist, particularly about women's issue.
Yeah, I think you're so right. And I think that that would make, because there's certain things that will affect us and create a social change. So the stories that we tell, the images that we see. And I think if the images that we see reproduce too often older narratives that are stuck in a particular worldview, then that has a huge impact on our imagination. So our imaginations really are a very big part of who we are, and we need to give our imaginations opportunity to expand. And I think the visual, I think you're really right, is a very important place. It's the thing that we talk about all the time, that representation matters. If we never see a woman president or we never see a woman CEO, we don't believe it's possible. We need to see it. We need to have a story about it. We need to have we need those experiences to think, oh, this too is possible. And I think you're right that the visual representation, when I was writing my first novel on Yashodhara, I was thinking about her so much, and I thought about her as a partner to the Buddha for such a long time that I remember going to like Buddhist temples and seeing a shrine, and I thought, well, where is she? Where is Yashodhara? She was there with him for lifetimes. She was his partner until he walked away. She was really present in his life. Why isn't she sitting next to him? And in the Apadana, she becomes a great teacher. Why? Where did she go? And it's the same when I started writing this other book. I thought, well, where are all the bhikkhunis in all the temples? Where's Mahapajapati? She's such a champion. Why is she not in how many statues are there in the entire Buddhist world of Mahapajapati? Like a few that I can count on my hand. How did we get to that? That we don't make, so the visual, like you're saying, I think changes so much. We need that visual representation.
You know, one scene that I was very impressed when Prince Siddhartha left the night when the son was born.
Yeah.
The most impressive painting was now it is in Kushinagar, in the Burmese temple, in the Burmese stupa, you know, down below they have this painting done on the wall. That is very soft and most moving. That the prince on his horse is living far away in the background, you know, and it was kind of blue color to tell you that it happened in the night time. And Yasodhara and the baby was in front. And the mosquito net was coming down like this. That was one of the most impressive painting I have seen about this particular scene.
It's such an important scene.
Yeah.
And it's a tragic scene because you feel, right? If you look at how it's described in the text, he looks at her and he looks at the baby and he thinks, and in the Jataka Nidana, he says to himself, if I go touch my son, so you feel he wants to touch Rahula, but if I touch him, she'll wake up and then he won't be able to do his great departure. And so you feel his anguish, right? This is a complicated moment in his life story. It's such a beautiful scene. It needs to be painted. It needs to be told. It needs to be sung in songs because it's his anguish. It's a perfect scene. These are stories you can't just study. You have to feel them. I mean, this belongs to an opera. I mean, you know, the man who's like looking at his wife and his child and he's like, but I have to go. Like, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
We need more paintings. We need more stories. Yeah, absolutely. We need plays, but plays that tell of the anguish.
Well, I think I'm going to draw this to a close, but I just want to thank you for your rich understanding and enthusiasm because I'm just inspired. And I think we'll share this video with people and they can hear the eloquence between you and Venerable Dhammananda on the rich tradition that you're describing, because it's very, very exciting. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for this opportunity to see Venerable. I'm so happy to see you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Satu.